After 4 years of marriage, before the 7-year-itch could even kick in, Julian Ziegler already had a mistress. At the gate of an upscale villa in Brindlewood, Willow Harper sat quietly in the back seat of an expensive car, watching her husband sneak around with another woman. The woman was young. Dressed in a white dress, she looked innocent and enchanting. They held hands like lovers, and Julian wore a tenderness Willow had never seen. The woman tilted her head up and playfully pouted at Julian. "My feet hurt. Carry me, Julian." Willow thought Julian would refuse. After all, he was known for being a cold, unapproachable man with a short temper. No matter how much he indulged his lover, he'd never tolerate that kind of fuss. But the next moment, Willow was slapped in the face. Julian gently rubbed the woman's delicate nose, looking both aloof and tender. Then, he picked her up effortlessly, cradling her in his arms as though she were the rarest of treasures. The woman's soft hands instinctively slid around the back of his neck. Her fingers lightly traced his hair. There was a cherry angioma on Julian's neck, which looked seductive and felt sensitive to the touch. Willow had once accidentally brushed against it in bed, and Julian had turned wild. He pinned her arms down and thrust into her, hard. Sure enough, Julian couldn't control himself. He pushed the woman against a pillar in the gazebo with an intense gaze. Willow shut her eyes, unwilling to watch any longer. She had never seen Julian like this, so wild with passion. So, what did that make her? Before they married, Julian had actively pursued her, saying, "Willow, you're the perfect partner for me in this world of power and prestige." That one sentence made Willow abandon her love for art. She threw herself into marrying Julian and plunged headfirst into the world of business, like a moth to the flame, consumed by passionate love. And for years, Julian had seized control of the Ziegler family. Since then, Willow had become a dispensable pawn. He found her too proper and lacking in femininity, so he kept a mistress on the side. Willow blamed herself for being so naive. She was such a joke. When she opened her eyes again, she felt nothing but indifference. Love was gone, so now it was about the money. The villa where Julian met his lover was their joint marital property. Willow didn't want to let this shameless couple have it. She quietly asked her secretary, Annie Hudson, in the front seat, "Has Julian been with her for the past 3 months?" Annie answered immediately, "The woman's name is Catherine Burke. She's Mr. Ziegler's childhood sweetheart, though not very bright. 3 months ago, Mr. Ziegler pushed through objections and arranged for her to join his company, keeping her well protected." She handed a stack of documents to Willow. Willow skimmed through them. She felt like she could make way for Catherine. As long as Julian was willing to split the joint property, she'd take her share and leave, with no second thoughts. Outside, the autumn leaves were golden. The setting sun cast a golden glow. It looked dazzling and bright. Willow steadied her emotions and dialed Julian's number. He was probably still having fun with Catherine, as the phone rang several times before he picked up. His tone was cold and aloof when he answered. "What is it?" Willow lowered her eyes. "It's my birthday today. Are you coming home for dinner?" There was a long silence on the other end. Julian didn't want to come home. Of course, he could make up any excuse to avoid it, another engagement he couldn't miss, but Willow could clearly hear Catherine's voice on the other end. She was calling him. "Are you done yet, Julian?" "Don't talk to her." Julian hesitated. After a moment, he awkwardly replied, "If there's nothing else, I'm hanging up now." The sound of the phone disconnecting followed. This was typical Julian, always decisive and never dragging things out. Annie shouted angrily, "Mr. Ziegler's too much. He actually forgot." But Willow didn't mind. Oh, it really was a shame that Julian's sweet time with Catherine was interrupted by her. But what could they do about it, anyway? Willow was the legal wife, after all. If she was upset, then she'd make sure to rain hell on Julian and Catherine's parade as well. Willow smiled faintly. He hasn't forgotten. He just doesn't care. Annie, call and have the electricity, water, and gas shut off at that villa. He'll come home then. Annie couldn't help but say, "You're really smart, Miss Harper." Willow didn't respond. She turned her face toward the window and stared at the outside world. The setting sun painted the sky in gold, and the evening clouds gathered in a tranquil embrace. She clearly remembered that on an evening just like this, with the sky painted in crimson, she had asked Julian if their marriage contract was for life and if they would never betray each other. Julian had said yes, that Willow was the most important person to him, but now, he made her feel like money was all that mattered. A single tear slipped down Willow's cheek. Willow returned to Grandview Manor. Half an hour later, Annie brought in the divorce papers. Willow was asking for half of the joint assets. After a bath, she was already dressed, but something made her turn back to the mirror. She slipped off her bathrobe and examined her figure under the bright crystal lights. Her body, worn from years of hard work, was naturally not plump. Thankfully, her smooth skin made her give off an air of cool elegance, but it was clear that she wasn't alluring enough for Julian. Otherwise, why would he be looking elsewhere? Suddenly, Willow thought of Catherine and even imagined Julian in bed with her. How intense it must have been. It must be far more passionate than when he was with her. She frowned slightly, feeling embarrassed by her comparison. Just then, the closet door creaked open. Julian was back, stood at the door of the closet. His tall, lean figure was wrapped in a luxury black shirt and pants. His chiseled features glowed under the bright lights, exuding the charm of a mature man. Willow couldn't help but think that even without his vast fortune, his looks alone would make countless women eager to have a fling with him. She had slept with him for 4 years. To some extent, her marriage wasn't that bad. The couple exchanged a glance and said nothing. Julian walked slowly into the closet and stooped behind Willow as they both looked at their reflections in the mirror. Willow had already gathered her clothes, and her hair was neatly tied up. Even her post-bath look radiated a strong, capable woman. Julian clearly remembered that on their wedding night, Willow was still somewhat fragile. She trembled with fear at the sight of his body, but that night, nothing had happened. 2 weeks later, after a business mishap, Willow had curled up in his arms, whispering his name. He had hugged her tightly. That night, they had truly become husband and wife. Their sex life had been sparse. At home, Willow was the dignified Mrs. Ziegler. At Nebula Group, she was a powerful executive. She always wore an unapproachable mask, cold as ice. Even in bed, Julian would say Willow had never truly let go and enjoyed it. After some time, he found it boring. Julian leaned in and teased, "You had the electricity and water shut off at the villa, didn't you? You're upset because I'm taking care of a respected elder's daughter?" Willow stared at him in the mirror. Julian knew it was her ovulation period. He gently caressed her earlobe, his voice low as he murmured, "Was it for your birthday or your physiological needs? Mrs. Ziegler, you're just 26 and already so sexually demanding, huh?" His words were crude, but Willow knew what he was after. He wanted a child. Julian's grandfather, Dominic Ziegler, still held 10% of Nebula Group's shares. Julian needed an heir to gain more leverage, but what Julian didn't know was that having a child would be difficult. During that accident, when Willow had pushed Julian away, she'd been violently kicked in the abdomen. This reduced her chances of pregnancy. Willow gently closed her eyes to hide the pain, but Julian seemed unusually eager. He easily picked her up, carried her to the large, soft bed in the master bedroom, and quickly pinned her down. But Willow wasn't willing. She pressed her hand against his chest, her hair partially undone and spilling across the white pillow. Her bathrobe was slightly loosened. Julian, however, couldn't take his eyes off her face. His gaze was feverish as he leaned down to kiss her. His body was already poised and ready. Willow clenched the bedsheet. Her fingertips left behind a mess of wrinkles. Even at a time like this, she found herself wondering if Catherine didn't satisfy Julian. Otherwise, why would he bother wasting time kissing her tonight instead of going straight to the point? Willow felt nothing other than disgust. So, she simply lay there like a plank, letting him do whatever he wanted. No matter how hard he tried, he wasn't getting a child out of her anyway. At first, Julian was aroused by the seductive Willow in her loosened bathrobe. But now, she just lay there like a lifeless plank on the sheets. Even the most eager man would find it uninspiring. What a mood killer. Sweat clung to the tips of Julian's hair. With a flushed face, he asked in a husky voice, "What's wrong? Not in the mood anymore?" They didn't sleep together often, but it still happened a few times a month. Those were his attempts to plant an heir in her womb. Willow lay on the white pillow, staring up at the man she had been with for 4 long years. She was exhausted. For once, she wanted to live for herself, but Julian didn't know that. He kept questioning why she refused to be intimate with him and why she wouldn't cooperate in giving him a legitimate heir to help him secure more power. Willow reached out, gently tracing her fingers along his face. In a soft voice, she said, "Julian, let's get a divorce." His expression darkened, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Is this because of Catherine?" "I've already told you. She's just a respected elder's daughter. You don't want her staying there, so I've already arranged for her to move elsewhere." Willow let out a sneer. A respected elder's daughter who needed to be kept in a private villa? Who had to be held so intimately when they walked together? Willow didn't even bother arguing. It was beneath her. Instead, she pulled open the nightstand drawer and took out a divorce agreement. Shoving it into his hands, she said in a light tone, "I want half of Nebula Group's shares in addition to the bank savings and real estate." Julian frowned. "Half of Nebula Group's shares? That's a bit greedy, don't you think, Mrs. Ziegler?" There was sarcasm in his voice, the same sharpness he used in business negotiations. Willow's heart turned to ice. Julian would never know that by taking that hit for him, she had lost her chance to ever become a mother. But she wasn't about to mention it. It would only sound pathetic. She had never regretted loving or hating him. She had given everything freely, and now she was ready to walk away just as easily. Willow leaned against the headboard. Her fair face looked gentle. She considered things from Julian's perspective. "If we get divorced, you can finally give your beloved a legitimate title. And I will take my shares and leave. That's a happy ending for everyone." She looked completely serious. That was when Julian finally realized that this wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment tantrum. She had planned this. As he looked at her, his dark eyes deepened, as if he could devour her whole. For a long time, he said nothing. Then his voice dropped to an icy edge. "Forget it, Willow. That's never happening. We're business partners. You know that as well as I do." Oh, she knew, but now? She didn't want to play along anymore. When she didn't respond, Julian grew irritated. He got up, threw on a robe, and headed for the guest room. He felt that Willow just needed time to cool down. By morning, she would likely find herself enjoying the feeling of being Mrs. Ziegler again, along with the thrill of being second in command at Nebula Group. Julian sneered inwardly. Willow had always been like that. Behind him, Willow's voice came softly, almost a whisper. It sounded almost like the timid Willow from 4 years ago. "Let's part on good terms, Julian. I really don't want to be with you anymore." Julian's body stiffened. After a long pause, he walked back to the bed and spoke softly. "You knew, from the moment you married me, that there is no love in the Ziegler family. I won't love you. And you better not expect it either. It won't make your life any easier." With a flick of his wrist, the divorce papers scattered to the floor like falling snow. At 8 a.m., Julian walked down the stairs, dressed in a perfectly tailored black and white suit. Every inch of fabric hugged his lean, powerful frame. He exuded effortless elegance. His mood had been fine. That was, until he walked into the empty dining room. Lifting his coffee cup, he asked the maid casually, "Where's Willow?" They had argued loudly last night, the noise echoing through the house. Even the maids knew about it. The maid replied cautiously, "Mrs. Ziegler left for work early this morning." Julian slammed his coffee cup down with a heavy thud. He suddenly lost his appetite. 30 minutes later, he arrived at Nebula Group in his car. His secretary, Esther Barker, was already waiting at the parking lot. The black Bentley came to a stop. Esther opened the car door and immediately briefed Julian on the day's meetings. As Julian walked, he buttoned up his suit jacket. His every move exuded masculine charm, causing several female employees to sneak glances. The two of them stepped into the private elevator. Esther paused, then lowered her voice. "Ms. Harper has suddenly placed her people in Project Aurelia." Julian glanced at the glowing red numbers on the panel. After a while, he chuckled. "Looks like she's growing bolder." During the meeting, Julian and Willow clashed in a heated debate. They were married, and Willow's business tactics were ones Julian had personally taught her. Watching them clash now was truly something to behold. The executives at Nebula Group were getting their money's worth in entertainment. By the time the meeting ended, the sun was already setting back in her office. Willow collapsed onto the leather couch, rubbing her temples so a dull headache throbbed at her skull, making her feel drained. She let down her long hair, letting it fall in loose waves. Annie set a glass of water on the table and whispered, "Mr. Ziegler's personal attorney called. He'd like to meet you downstairs in the cafe. Do you want to go?" Willow raised an eyebrow. Jeffrey Gibson? Jeffrey Gibson was one of the top lawyers in the country. His firm, Gibson Legal Group, was an industry leader. More importantly, he was Julian's hidden hand. If Julian had something inconvenient to handle, Jeffrey handled it for him. They were more than business associates. Their interests were deeply intertwined. Julian could divorce Willow, but he would never burn bridges with Jeffrey. Sending him meant one thing: Julian didn't want the divorce to become public knowledge. After a moment's thought, Willow agreed. 10 minutes later, she took the private elevator down to the cafe on the first floor. Jeffrey sat by the window, dressed in a tailored three-piece suit that highlighted his tall, broad frame. His features were sharp, with a habitual expression of sternness. Upon hearing Willow's footsteps, he looked up at her, and his typically unreadable eyes, a flicker of surprise showed. This wasn't the Willow he remembered. In Jeffrey's memory, she was always impeccably dressed in expensive suits, standing by Julian's side with flawless composure as they navigated the cutthroat business world. But everyone in their circle knew that Julian didn't love Willow. His heart belonged to someone else, but Willow looked different today. She had changed into a comfortable, lightweight knit sweater that clung just slightly to her frame. Her sleek hair, with a subtle curl, fell loosely over her shoulders, looking soft. Just as Jeffrey was mesmerized by her beauty, she sat across from him and asked coldly, "Julian sent you?" Jeffrey regained his usual calm composure. He took a document from his briefcase and gently pushed it toward Willow. "Mrs. Ziegler, according to this prenup, if you insist on divorcing, you won't get much out of it." Willow flipped through the pages. When she flipped to the last page, she paused for a moment. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. 4 years ago, Julian had kept a trump card hidden. Willow stared at the document for a long time before finally saying, "Even if I get nothing, I still want a divorce. And Jeffrey, don't call me Mrs. Ziegler anymore. Just call me Willow." After dealing with so many celebrity divorce cases, Jeffrey had become completely detached. He picked up his cup and took a sip of his coffee. "Why now? I thought you loved Julian." "Affairs happen all the time in our world." Willow turned away, laughing bitterly. Everyone knew she loved Julian, but Julian himself? Or maybe he knew. He just didn't care. At that moment, Willow exuded a fragile kind of beauty. One that, in Jeffrey's eyes, was more likely to make a man want to possess her than even Catherine. As he was contemplating this, the cafe door swung open, and a tall figure walked toward them. It was none other than Julian. As soon as he entered, he saw Jeffrey staring intently at Willow like he was lost in thought. Suddenly, Julian felt a discomfort rise in his chest. Julian gave Jeffrey a slight nod. Jeffrey smiled faintly and left, giving the couple, who were on different wavelengths, some space. After Jeffrey left, Julian glanced at Willow and frowned. "Why are you dressed like that? Go change. We're having dinner at the Ziegler residence later." Willow understood perfectly. When Julian mentioned dinner, it was code for showing off their fake affection for Dominic's stake in the company. At times, Willow couldn't help but feel that Julian was a contradiction. He presented himself as polished and serene, but beneath the surface, he was more driven by ambition and wealth than anyone. He was perfectly suited for the world of power and status. Willow was willing to go along with it. Before they separated their assets, she would prioritize their interests. She returned to her office to change into a suit and met Julian in the private elevator. The elevator was empty except for the two of them. Julian glanced at his watch and said casually, "I think you've probably dropped the idea of divorce after talking to Jeffrey. You're still in your fertile window. Get ready when we get home. If you're not into it, I'll make it quick. Willow gave a self-deprecating smile. Julian was as indifferent as ever when it came to discussing having children. And she had endured such a marriage for 4 years, she was even colder. Same as before. I'll take half the assets and let you go free. Julian didn't like that response. He was about to snap when the elevator suddenly stopped, the doors slid open. Standing outside was a young lady in a white dress. She looked pure and innocent. It was Catherine. She stepped into the elevator and looked at Willow with a cautious plea. The employee elevator's broken. Can I borrow this one, Miss Harper? There were 3 people in the elevator, yet it felt crowded. Willow held the open button, saying nothing, but her message was clear. Catherine was mortified. Her beautiful face flushed red. Biting her lip, she looked at Julian, silently asking him to step in and support her. Julian, however, spoke gently. Do as Miss Harper says. Catherine reluctantly stepped out of the elevator. The whole scene disgusted Willow. She didn't say a word even until she got into the car in the parking lot. Julian, however, casually spoke as he fastened his seatbelt. There's nothing between us. Don't overthink it. Willow turned and quietly watched him. Feeling sorry for her? Julian, maybe you should go get checked at a hospital. Julian misunderstood. He thought she was talking about their fertility. He answered naturally, I can have children. Willow sneered. I meant, you should get checked for STDs. That set him off. He unbuckled his seatbelt, yanked her over, and pulled her onto his lap. Luckily, the Bentley's front seat was spacious enough for him to move freely. Willow's body hit the steering wheel with a painful thud. She pushed him away with all her strength. Are you out of your mind, Julian? Julian, who seemed so refined, now had his head buried between her legs, doing all sorts of unmentionable things. In her frustration, Willow grabbed his hair and yanked so hard she almost pulled it out. Finally, Julian stopped. He looked up at her. His face was bathed in the dim light of the underground parking lot. His long lashes cast shadows over his sharp features. At that moment, his expression was almost tender and filled with pity. Willow was taken aback, but before she could react, Julian grabbed the back of her neck and kissed her violently. He bit down hard on her tongue, drawing blood. Her blood mixed with their saliva. Willow froze, staring at him in disbelief. Her disdain in her eyes was so obvious. Julian, still holding her lips, whispered, Am I clean, Mrs. Ziegler? His voice sounded breathless, showing great restraint. Willow shoved him away. She sat back in the passenger seat, trembling as she straightened her suit. Yet her chest still heaved from Julian's intense passion. This unfamiliar surge of emotions scared her, but she tried to appear calm. Don't worry. I'll have Annie arrange a checkup. Julian was aroused, but his desire waned when he saw her indifferent expression. He buckled his seatbelt and stepped on the gas. During the drive, Julian's phone rang several times. Willow guessed it was Catherine calling, but she had already decided on the divorce and didn't bother asking. Julian glanced at Willow, his gaze lingering for a moment. Half an hour later, the black Bentley pulled up to a grand mansion. The car stopped. Julian glanced at his phone and said casually, Work stuff. Willow didn't respond. Annoyed, Julian was about to say something when the Ziegler Residence's maid opened the car door with a warm smile. Everyone's waiting for you, Mr. and Mrs. Ziegler. Please come in and join us. Julian nodded graciously. He even took Willow's hand, playing up the loving husband act. Willow found it all so fake. They entered the dining room and joined the family for dinner. Dominic had 2 sons, the eldest Tyler Ziegler, and the second Liam Ziegler. Julian was Liam's son. A large round table was filled with people, and it was clear Dominic had heard about Catherine. He gave Julian a few sharp words and then tried to talk to Willow about compromise and letting things slide. T was all code for wanting a grandson. Julian glanced at Willow and smiled. I'll work hard with Willow tonight. Dominic's face grew stern. Didn't you do anything for the past 4 years? Julian deflected the comment with a few words. Willow, meanwhile, kept eating, her expression blank. No one knew she could hardly have children anymore. It was all because of Julian. Just then, Julian's phone rang. He glanced at it and walked out to the front yard to answer. It was clearly a private call. A serving of fish was placed in Willow's bowl. Dominic spoke with a meaningful tone. Men are like cats. Sometimes they stray, but eventually, they come home. Willow responded in her usual tone. I guess that day will be when he's under the ground. The maid stifled a giggle. Willow, in a bad mood, left early and went to the backyard to clear her head. By the swimming pool, the moonlight was cold. A tall figure stepped into the light, someone who resembled Julian in many ways. It was Julian's cousin, Dexter Ziegler. Dexter hated Willow. He blamed her for Julian's rise, and with Julian now having an affair, Dexter was ready to make things worse. Handed Willow a stack of photos, all showing Julian and Catherine in compromising positions. Dexter smirked as he asked, Do you know who this woman is? Her father is Charlie Burke, a famous artist with influence in the industry. Her mother, Nancy Rogers, is Julian's mother's best friend. What chance do you have to compete with her? Be careful, or Julian will leave you with nothing. It's not too late to work with me now. Willow glanced at the photos and tossed them in the trash. She looked up at Dexter, meeting the gaze of this ruthless figure she had clashed with countless times. With a calm demeanor, she said, Thank you for your advice, but unfortunately, I won't be needing it. Dexter sneered. I'll be waiting for the day Julian dumps you. Willow smiled faintly. She didn't care because she had no intention of holding on to Julian anymore. Her dance with him was all just a waiting game. Once she got the money and the shares, Julian would be a thing of the past, just another fleeting memory of love and hate. Willow turned to head back inside, but as she lifted her gaze, she saw Julian, stood quietly in the hallway, a picture of elegance. The lighting highlighted his refined features, making him even more striking. It was this perfect appearance that had once captivated Willow. His gaze was dark, even deeper than the night. He'd seen her talking to Dexter, and that same discomfort rose inside him again, much like the feeling he had when he saw Jeffrey staring at Willow in the cafe. It was 9 p.m. when they left the Ziegler residence. As Julian fastened his seatbelt, he asked casually, What were you and Dexter talking about? You two seemed to be having a good time. Willow replied softly, Oh, just chatting about your childhood sweetheart. Julian was rendered speechless. After a brief silence, he reached over and lightly clasped Willow's hand. His voice carried a rare hint of gentleness as he said, I never slept with her. Willow leaned back against the seat, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She knew very well that Julian's tenderness was only because she was in her fertile window. He just wanted to plant his seed in her womb. It had nothing to do with love and even less to do with her. She wondered if Julian would still try to hold on to this marriage if he found out she couldn't have children anymore. Or would he rush to sign the divorce papers and start searching for the next woman fit to be his wife? He was putting in the effort tonight. He leaned in, his touch teasing, trying to stir her emotions. Willow just felt pathetic. Julian didn't love her. To him, she was a business asset and a vessel to bear his children. He didn't enjoy being intimate with her, yet every month, he came to her solely for the purpose of conceiving a child. How was that any different from an animal's instinctual mating? She turned her face away from his approaching lips. Her voice was barely above a whisper, tinged with quiet sorrow as she said, I meant what I said about the divorce, Julian. If you think I'm asking for too much, we can renegotiate. Under the dim light of the car, Julian studied her face like he was trying to see through her skin and into her soul. After a long silence, his voice turned cold. I already told you. Divorce is not an option. Once we have a child, you won't have time for all these wild ideas. Willow closed her eyes, exhaling softly. What if I can't have kids? He frowned, brushing off the thought. That's impossible. We both did full medical exams before we got married. Everything was fine. Willow let out a bitter laugh. The health report from 4 years ago was long obsolete, just like the vows Julian had made when he proposed. They had vanished along with his conscience, lost in the warmth of Catherine's embrace. By the time they returned to Grandview Manor, it was nearly 10:00 p.m. Julian took a shower in the guest room. He had planned to convince Willow to sleep with him tonight, but a phone call interrupted his plans. He left in a hurry. Willow figured he was going to see Catherine. She didn't care. At least for tonight, she didn't have to deal with him. Julian didn't come home that night. The lights in Grandview Manor burned until dawn, but the man of the house never returned. For the next week, he didn't come home at all. Julian hadn't made any moves to proceed with the divorce either. What was Willow doing during those cold autumn nights? Most nights, she stood by her bedroom's floor-to-ceiling window, watching the sycamore leaves outside turn yellow. She wondered if she would have been happier if she had never given up painting, never married so young, and never stepped into the business world. She hadn't made a single call to Julian. A man who chose to spend his nights elsewhere might as well be dead to her. The next time they saw each other, it was at a business function at Vale Club, Brindley's most exclusive business lounge. The moment Willow walked into the private room, she saw Catherine snuggled up next to Julian. She looked every bit the devoted little darling. When Catherine noticed Willow's arrival, she simply lowered her head and started playing on her phone, as if Willow wasn't even worth acknowledging. Annie bristled with anger, ready to lash out, but Willow stopped her. She's Mr. Ziegler's favorite now. Let her enjoy it while it lasts. There was no seat for her beside Julian. Naturally, she wasn't about to sit on the client's side, so she excused herself for a trip to the restroom, giving Julian plenty of time to deal with Catherine. The restroom was bathed in dazzling crystal light. As Willow washed her hands, the sharp sound of approaching heels echoed behind her. Willow lifted her gaze and saw Catherine in the mirror. Catherine stepped beside Willow. Her usual deference was replaced with a sharp-edged provocation. I've moved back into the villa. Julian said I can stay as long as I want. Willow shut off the faucet. She stared at that youthful face in the mirror. Catherine's face was so innocent and plump. It was nothing like her own, which carried the faint weariness of years spent in the business world. Youth was a wonderful thing, and yet, Willow suddenly remembered that she was only 26. She lowered her head and slowly twisted the 6-carat wedding ring on her finger before speaking calmly. Ms. Burke, if I were you, I'd stick to being Julian's well-kept canary. Stay quiet, keep him entertained, and ask for money. I certainly wouldn't go around broadcasting what happens in the bedroom. And honestly, why are you even here? This isn't the kind of place for you. Catherine smirked. Julian will protect me. He won't let me drink. Is that so? Willow smiled faintly. You seem to misunderstand something, Ms. Burke. In Julian's world, money comes first. He keeps business and women separate. In a moment, he won't just ask you to drink. If it benefits him, he might as well hand you poison. Catherine paled. I don't believe you. Willow's smile faded. After Catherine left, Willow stared at her reflection in the mirror, lost in thought. The bravado she'd put on earlier felt laughable, even to herself. She knew that if she played her cards right, she could always remain Mrs. Ziegler. But that wasn't the kind of life or marriage she wanted. She was tired. Tired enough to flip the damn table. By the time Willow returned to the private room, the seat beside Julian had already been cleared. She slipped into it naturally, picking up their old performance of a loving couple. Catherine sat far away, looking pitiful. Her eyes were shimmering with unshed tears. Julian frowned. Did you really have to be so hard on her? Willow didn't answer. He had no idea that every word he spoke in Catherine's defense felt like a blade slicing into her. He felt bad for Catherine, but what about her? What about all the years she had spent at his side, fighting battles with him? What did that count for? She was bleeding inside, but her expression remained calm. With a polite smile, she suggested Catherine have a drink with one of the clients. The man was clearly interested in her innocent charm. Catherine, knowing she had Julian's favor, kept making excuses. Under the crystal chandelier, Julian's handsome face darkened. The storm brewing in his eyes was undeniable. Of course, he knew Willow was doing this on purpose. Julian swirled his glass. His eyes were on Willow, but his words were meant for Catherine. Project Aurelia is a multi-billion-dollar collaboration. No matter what, Ms. Burke, you should at least show Mr. Smith some courtesy. Catherine didn't dare refuse anymore. Her lips trembled as she muttered, "Okay." As she reluctantly raised her glass, Willow sat beside Julian, watching the scene unfold. Julian put on a poker face, while Willow couldn't shake the feeling that she was playing the wicked woman who had buried his grand love. They married at a young age and had been through a lot together. But at this moment, they had forgotten that entirely. Late at night, in the underground parking lot, Annie held Willow steady and opened the car door. "Careful, Miss Harper. You drank a little too much tonight." Willow rubbed her temple and murmured, "I was in a bad mood." Annie understood. Julian had crossed the line tonight. Project Aurelia had been Willow's from the very beginning. She had built it from the ground up, secured every resource, every connection. And yet Julian had brought Catherine here tonight, right under her nose. No wonder Willow was pissed. At least Catherine had ended up in the hospital. That was satisfying. Just as Willow was about to get into the car, a strong hand grabbed her wrist. Before she could react, she was shoved against the cold, sleek surface of a black SUV with a loud thud. The car's imposing presence only made her seem more fragile and alone. It took Willow a moment to steady herself from the pain. Then, she lifted her gaze to Julian's stormy expression and spoke softly, "Give us a moment, Annie." Annie hesitated, but one look at Julian's expression made her swallow any protest. She only dared to whisper, "Mrs. Ziegler isn't feeling well." Willow's eyes reddened slightly. The moment Annie left, Julian snapped. He grabbed Willow's chin and demanded, "Why did you have to be so hard on her? She's in the hospital right now, getting her stomach pumped." "Willow, I told you. She's just a respected elder's daughter. I was only looking out for." The sharp crack of a slap cut him off. Willow's palm stung, and her whole body trembled uncontrollably. Looking at Julian, she smiled bitterly. "Does looking out for her require you to bring her into the bed? Julian, are you completely shameless, or do you really think I'm that stupid?" Julian's handsome face was whipped to the side. Slowly, he turned back, running his tongue along the inside of his cheek. His gaze locked onto Willow, dark and murderous, yet his tone remained eerily calm. "Is this how badly you want my love? Enough to do whatever it takes?" Willow scoffed, mimicking his tone. "Don't flatter yourself." Julian finally seemed to calm down. After a long pause, he reached out and gently traced her face. "You're not as obedient as you used to be back then, Willow. What's so bad about playing the perfect wife? Why don't you want to have a child to secure your place? Why do you care so much? Why must you always go against me?" The night air was cold. Willow's face was streaked with tears, but she didn't even feel them. "Back then? So, you do know it's in the past? Julian, do you really think we're still the same as before? Back then, there were no other women hanging around you. Back then, you still came home at night. Back then, you weren't tracking my ovulation just so I could pop out a child for you. So tell me, Julian. Was it you who changed, or was it me?" After 4 years of sharing a bed, they had finally dropped all pretenses. Julian studied her, the woman who had walked through the battlefield of power and ambition by his side for the past 4 years. After what felt like an eternity, his gaze darkened, like he had made a decision at that very moment. The night was still, like the funeral of a love long gone. Julian let go of Willow and took a step back. "Starting tomorrow, you're off Project Aurelia. As for your position in the company, I'll discuss it with the board and make the necessary adjustments." Willow let out a chuckle. The first thing he did after achieving success was to cut her off. Deep down, they both knew that Catherine wasn't the real issue between them. Julian was simply burning the bridge, trying to push Willow back into the role of the perfect wife, whose sole duty was to bear his children. He called it love, but in reality, it was a lifelong cage. Love. Children. Something inside her snapped. A bone-deep exhaustion washed over her. She suddenly felt that everything she did in the past had all been one-sided. Loving Julian wasn't fate, it was a curse. She didn't want to hide it anymore. She would tell Julian that she, Willow Harper, could never have children. Willow knew that once she spoke the truth, there would be no turning back between her and Julian, but when disappointment had built up to its breaking point, one would throw caution to the wind and let go of everything, looking up at the man she had once loved so deeply. She was ready to peel open her wounds and expose them completely before him. When she spoke, her heart ached so much it felt numb. "Don't bother making any decisions, Julian. I don't want my position in Nebula Group or even the title anymore." "Because I can't." She never got to finish because Julian's phone rang. His eyes stayed locked on her face as he answered. On the other end, Esther's urgent voice came through. "Mr. Ziegler, Ms. Burke is in critical condition. You need to come now." "Okay." Julian hung up and turned to Willow. "We'll talk later." Without another word, he strode to his black Rolls-Royce, ready to leave. Willow stood frozen in place. A gust of night wind swept past, chilling her to the bone. At first, she whispered his name. Then she raised her voice. And finally, she screamed, emptying every ounce of sorrow into her words, "Julian Ziegler. Can't you even give me one damn minute? 4 years of marriage, and I'm not worth hearing out for 1 minute?" His hand rested on the car door as he replied coldly, "We'll talk after Catherine is stable." The engine roared to life. And then, he was gone. The night was as cold as water, yet it was nothing compared to the freezing hollowness inside her. Willow stared into the darkness where Julian had disappeared and finally finished the sentence he never let her say. "I can't have children, Julian." The wind howled around her. She said it again, "I can't have children." Each time she said it, it was like striking a whip against her own past love and mocking the foolish devotion she had given him. She had given him her youth, her everything. But to Julian, she was worth nothing. Her pain and heartbreak had never mattered to him. Suddenly, she wanted to break free and rid herself of the chains that had bound her as Mrs. Ziegler. After tonight, she would no longer be Julian's wife. She would just be Willow Harper. And she would live for herself. Willow lowered her head and stared at the ridiculous suit she was wearing. In the business world, Julian needed it. But outside of it, he found it dull and uninteresting. Now, even Willow felt its restraints were laughable. She had actually believed that catering to a man could earn her love. What a joke. When Annie arrived, Willow had already discarded her blazer. The top 2 buttons of her silk blouse were undone, revealing a small glimpse of fair skin. Her long hair cascaded down her slender back, exuding an effortless allure. Leaning against the car, she stretched out her long, slender legs. She turned to Annie and asked softly, "Got a cigarette?" "I want one." Annie felt a sting in her nose. She had been Willow's secretary for 4 years. She knew better than anyone how much Willow had loved Julian. And now, she was watching her fall apart. Annie didn't have cigarettes, but she found a way to get a pack. Willow had never smoked before. The first inhale burned her throat, making her cough until tears welled up in her eyes. Amid the choking haze of smoke, she smiled through her tears, breaking her love for Julian into shards of hate and piercing them deep into her bones. For the first time, Willow let loose. The dim lighting and intoxicating atmosphere draped everything in decadence. Willow was completely wasted. She didn't care about Julian's opinion or the Ziegler family's rules anymore. None of it mattered now. Slumped over the bar, she tapped her glass, signaling the bartender for another round. Before he could pour, a hand reached out, pressing down on her glass. Following that, a tall, imposing figure took the seat beside her. It was Jeffrey Gibson from Gibson Legal Group. His dark eyes held a thoughtful glint as he studied Willow intently. She was even more uninhibited and alluring than last time. Her body, seemingly boneless, lay draped over the bar. With 2 buttons undone on her blouse, a hint of soft, tempting skin was easily visible. She had really soft skin. Jeffrey's gaze darkened. After a moment, he took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. Startled, she looked up at him. Under the flickering bar lights, she met his deep, unreadable eyes. It felt like staring into an abyss. Jeffrey's voice was cool and detached. "You've had too much to drink. Let me take you home." Willow leaned back against the bar, staring at him with unfocused eyes. He was surprised to notice the subtle allure in the curve of her eyes. It was an enticing charm usually hidden beneath her usual restrained attire. Her voice was slurred, stripped of its usual poise. "Who the hell are you? Why should I go with you? There was no reasoning with a drunk woman. Jeffrey pulled out his wallet and placed a wad of cash on the counter. Without another word, he scooped Willow into his arms. She struggled instinctively, but he held her firmly. His tone was harsh, as if he were speaking to a criminal. Unless you want your face all over the news tomorrow, leave with me. Now. Willow found herself trapped in his hold. Her cheek rested against the crook of Jeffrey's neck, and his skin burned against hers. Uncomfortable, she shifted slightly, moving her face to his shoulder instead. The thin layer of his shirt provided some distance, and she felt a little more at ease, but still, she protested, "Put me down, Jeffrey." In the parking lot, neon lights shimmered. The stars were barely visible above. As Jeffrey looked down at the woman in his arms, a strange glint flickered in his eyes. Willow knew it was him, but he quickly pushed down that fleeting emotion. He hadn't forgotten that Willow was Julian's wife, not a woman he could indulge in a fleeting romance with. 5 minutes later, he tossed Willow into the passenger seat. She leaned against the leather seat with her eyes closed. Her face looked pale. As she slept, she looked utterly fragile. Jeffrey glanced at her twice before pulling out his phone to call Julian. Both of Julian's phones were turned off. Jeffrey figured it had something to do with Catherine. Why else would Willow be this wasted? He was about to call Esther when Willow suddenly woke up. She reached out and slapped the phone out of his hand. "I don't want to go home." Her head tilted back slightly, and her chest rose and fell with each uneven breath. The silky fabric of her blouse shifted with her movements, carrying a faint trace of her scent. It was undeniably alluring. Jeffrey's throat tightened. He tore his gaze away, staring out at the quiet, empty streets. After a moment, he glanced back at her. She had already dozed off again. For a few seconds, he just watched her in silence. Then he opened the car door and stepped out. The night stretched vast and quiet around him. Dressed in black, he blended into the darkness as he leaned against the hood of his Range Rover. He pulled out a cigarette, held it between his lips, and cupped a hand around the lighter's flickering flame. A wisp of smoke curled into the air, only to be swept away by the night breeze. It softened the sharp lines of his features. Halfway through his cigarette, he turned to look at the woman inside the car. Dressed in white, she looked like a painting, with a trace of intoxicating allure shimmering at the corner of her eyes. The autumn night was crisp outside, but inside the car, it was warm and quiet. Willow caught the scent of fresh tobacco. Jeffrey smoked the same brand as Julian. For a moment, in her hazy state, she got confused. She thought Julian was the one sitting beside her. Her eyes fluttered shut as she reached out, grasping his hand. Julian. Half asleep, she felt like she had slipped back in time. Back to when she and Julian were still a young couple. Jeffrey didn't pull his hand away. He didn't say a word either. He simply turned and looked out at the road ahead. The night was as deep and dense, eerily similar to the way he felt at that moment. Jeffrey had been with women before, but those had always been casual arrangements, no strings attached. He had never experienced emotions as intense as Willow's. For the first time, he wondered what it would be like to be loved by someone like her. In the distance, fireworks bloomed against the sky, their brilliance cutting through the night. Willow stirred slightly, just a small movement, but Jeffrey noticed. He turned to her, and his eyes were deep and unreadable. "You awake?" Willow's limbs felt heavy, but her mind was slowly clearing. She remembered drinking too much. She vaguely recalled Jeffrey pulling her out of the bar, but the rest was a blur. Her voice was hoarse. "What time is it?" "Just past 1:30 a.m., Jeffrey replied. Willow gazed out at the fireworks with misty eyes. She was unusually quiet. After a long silence, she spoke softly. "I once saw the most beautiful fireworks in the world. I thought they were mine to keep. But I forgot that no matter how dazzling, fireworks only last for a moment. Just like Julian and me. I thought if I gave up everything for him, we'd last forever. But now I finally understand that Julian might have imagined love once or twice, but the woman he loves was never me." A bitter smile curved her lips. "Jeffrey, do you think I'm a failure?" "You're not." Jeffrey's voice was calm. "As long as you want it, you'll always be Mrs. Ziegler." It wasn't just empty comfort, men like Julian didn't divorce easily. He might enjoy spoiling a younger woman for a while, but the title of Mrs. Ziegler was reserved for someone like Willow. Willow just smiled faintly. She said nothing more and kept watching the fireworks. By 2 a.m., Jeffrey pulled up in front of Grandview Manor. The car came to a stop. Willow turned to him and thanked him for the ride. She held out his jacket, ready to return it. "Keep it on," Jeffrey said. "It's cold out." Willow thought that it seemed more proper to return it after getting it cleaned, so she didn't insist. Holding the jacket, she stepped out of the car and bid him farewell. Jeffrey remained seated, offering a polite nod before pressing the gas and driving away from the villa. The moonlight was cool, and the wind brushed against her skin. Willow rubbed her temple. Her head ached. From the house, Blair Vaughn, the housekeeper, hurried over. The moment she got close, she caught the scent of alcohol. Blair didn't comment on it. Instead, she asked gently, "Have you been drinking, Mrs. Ziegler?" "Mr. Ziegler just called. He'll be dropping by soon to pick up some clothes. Would you like to pack them, or should I take care of it?" Willow had already made up her mind about the divorce. Julian's affairs no longer concerned her. She told Blair to handle it, while she wandered up with Jeffrey's jacket in hand. The moment she touched the bed, she drifted off into a deep sleep. A night breeze lifted the sheer curtains. Moonlight spilled into the room, casting a soft, ethereal glow over the woman on the bed. She looked delicate and alluring. At the foot of the bed, Jeffrey's black jacket lay where she had dropped it. In the deep of the night, a car pulled into the driveway. Julian had come back, but he didn't step out. He simply opened the door of his black Bentley. The evening had ended badly between him and Willow. And with Catherine's condition worsening, he had no reason to stay. He was just here for his clothes. Blair heard the car and quickly came outside. She handed the duffel bag with a change of clothes to Julian. "In the car," she said. "Mrs. Ziegler just got back. She seems pretty drunk. Mr. Gibson was kind enough to bring her home." Julian frowned. Willow had been drinking. After a brief pause, he decided to check on her. A moment later, Julian went upstairs and pushed open the master bedroom door. The lights were dim, and the air carried the faint scent of wine. Even Willow's breathing was tinged with a soft sweetness. Julian reached for the switch and turned on the wall lamp. Light flooded the room. Julian's gaze immediately fell on Willow, lying on the large bed. Her long hair was messily spread across her chest. The silk blouse she wore hung loosely open at the collar, revealing smooth, soft skin. Her black skirt had ridden up slightly from her movements, accentuating the alluring curves of her body. Willow had always had a great figure. Julian had always known that. He was her husband, after all, but she had never truly let herself go. She was always reserved and distant in bed. Sometimes, she would even bring up business while they were in the middle of the action. Over time, his desire had faded, but the sight before him stirred something in Julian, a flicker of desire he hadn't felt in a long time. He figured it had simply been too long since he'd last let himself go. Normally, he was used to keeping his desires in check. He sat down on the edge of the bed, watching her. Even in sleep, her brows were drawn together, as if she were troubled by some unseen weight. He had always known Willow loved him. But he didn't love her. All he had ever been willing to give her was the title of Mrs. Ziegler. Love had never been part of the equation. Lifting a hand, he brushed his fingers lightly against her cheek. Her skin was cold to the touch. His gaze darkened, and he murmured, "Isn't being Mrs. Ziegler enough for you?" "Willow, love that burns too brightly only leads to ruin. I thought you'd seen it all and let go of love long ago." The only response was the steady rhythm of her breathing. Julian was about to leave when his gaze swept over the foot of the bed. And then he stopped. A man's jacket lay there. Julian reached out and picked up the jacket. It was from a high-end designer brand. Most of his formal wear came from the same label, but this jacket definitely wasn't his, which meant it had to be Jeffrey's. A sharp discomfort twisted in his chest. Even though he knew Jeffrey wouldn't have any designs on Willow, the innate possessiveness of a man still unsettled him. Willow was his wife. The living room downstairs was brightly lit. Blair had stayed up, waiting for Julian to come down. Finally, she heard movement from upstairs. Julian came downstairs with a dark expression. Without a word, he handed the jacket to Blair and said flatly, "Take this to the dry cleaners, then have someone send it to Jeffrey's firm." Blair took the jacket without a word. Julian opened the door of his black Bentley, ready to head to the hospital. But just before starting the engine, he hesitated. Tilting his head back, he looked toward the second floor of the house. Willow was sleeping up there. The night had ended on a sour note. Willow had said she had something important to tell him. The next morning, Willow woke up with a headache. Blair was considerate enough to bring her some medicine. After taking it, Willow felt much better. She was about to take a shower when Blair huffed indignantly, "Mr. Ziegler is completely into that vixen. He came home last night and saw you completely drunk but still chose to drive away." That was how Willow found out Julian had come back the previous night. Blair suddenly remembered something else. "Oh, right, Mrs. Ziegler. Mr. Ziegler told us to have Mr. Gibson's jacket cleaned and delivered to him. At least he's still considerate toward you." Blair had no idea about Julian's real intentions. She thought it was a gesture of care, but Willow understood. Julian was just afraid of being cuckolded. She wasn't feeling well, so she stayed home for 2 days and took time to visit her grandmother. On Monday, Nebula Group underwent a shakeup. A major project had gone awry, and all the evidence pointed to Willow's negligence. After a board meeting, she was suspended from all her duties and had to vacate the vice CEO's office that very day. On the 32nd floor, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, Willow quietly watched the bustling cityscape of Brindley. Behind her, Annie pushed the door open and spoke in a hushed voice, "Ms. Harper, Project Aurelia has been handed over to Catherine." Annie was seething, but Willow remained calm. At this point, she no longer wanted Julian. Fame and status had become fleeting clouds in the wind. Once she took what she deserved, she would leave with dignity, stepping out of Julian's world. Whether he truly loved Catherine or was simply compensating her no longer mattered to Willow. Just as she was about to speak, her phone rang on the desk. She walked over and answered. It was Julian's father, Liam Ziegler, asking her to meet him in his office. Willow agreed. That afternoon, she took a car to Liam's workplace. Liam wasn't employed at Nebula Group. He had his own business. He seemed refined and carefree, but in reality, he was quietly paving the way for Julian. It was late October. A gust of autumn wind carried the scent of osmanthus blossoms. The moment Willow stepped out of the car, Liam's personal secretary, Victoria Morris, greeted her. She was a strikingly beautiful woman who smiled as she led Willow to an elegant lounge. Victoria slid the door open and respectfully announced, "Mr. Ziegler, Ms. Harper is here." Liam was sipping coffee. Hearing this, he looked up and said warmly, "Willow, you're here. Come in and have some coffee with me." Willow stepped inside the lounge. Liam was well aware of the recent changes at Nebula Group. Without revealing his thoughts, he poured Willow a cup of coffee and discussed the company matters. He had always admired Willow. After all, her presence kept Julian's position secure, but sometimes, ability was a double-edged sword. A beast with sharp claws and fangs might turn into a threat. Liam and Julian shared the same view on this matter, but Julian was just more aggressive in his approach. Liam remained affable. "I've always admired you, Willow. Are you and Julian having problems recently? If it's about Catherine, don't bother. She's just a naive girl." Willow smiled faintly. "We have no problems. She wasn't foolish enough to make their conflict public." The Ziegler family was not known for kindness. Liam was momentarily taken aback. His appreciation for Willow deepened. She truly had composure. After a moment of contemplation, he voiced his concern. "Project Aurelia is a collaboration with Mr. Chapman. Since Dexter has a volatile temperament, I worry that his involvement will bring trouble to the company." Willow immediately understood his implication. Her response was calm. "You can rest assured. Officially, Ms. Burke is in charge of the project, but Julian is actually overseeing it. Dexter won't have the chance to stir up trouble." Liam, realizing his thoughts had been exposed, felt slightly uncomfortable and tried to smooth things over with some casual conversation. By the time Willow left, it was dusk. The sky was bathed in a shattered golden glow. Victoria stood by the car, nodding slightly as she bid Willow goodbye. With her poised smile, she looked just like a flawless puppet. Suddenly, Willow felt like she had seen her before. Just before nightfall, Willow returned to her office. She began packing. Some things she handed over, others she discarded. Annie cursed Julian, vowing that when they made their comeback, they would crush all the spineless opportunists. Willow only smiled faintly. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Julian stood at the entrance, impeccably dressed, looking like a magazine cover model. He ushered Annie out. She muttered "scumbag" under her breath before leaving. After Annie left, Julian stepped inside. His deep eyes were fixed on Willow. They met again, but everything had changed. Out of consideration for their past, Julian softened his tone. "Catherine was never the issue between us. Willow, if you want, I'll call a board meeting next month to reinstate you at Nebula Group." Willow chuckled softly. How ridiculous, their falling out, her breakdown that night, and the way she drowned her sorrows in alcohol were all childish rebelliousness in his eyes. He even believed that he was being generous and she should be grateful for his offer, but the things he once promised no longer held any value for her. Did he really think she still wanted to serve him and stay by his side? Just imagining how he cherished and protected Catherine made her feel like she had wasted her youth. Willow stepped forward and adjusted Julian's collar. For years, she had done this for him before every event. She had performed this act countless times. Julian instinctively leaned down, allowing her to straighten his collar more easily. They were so close. She could feel his warm breath on her skin. Looking at Willow up close, Julian couldn't help but recall the way she had looked that night in bed. They had been married for 4 years and had been intimate countless times, but he had never seen her like that before. His Adam's apple bobbed slightly. The movement carried an undeniable allure. When Willow was done, she gently ran her fingers over the fine fabric, a trace of nostalgia in her touch. 6 years of love and 4 years of marriage. It was over. This was the last time. Julian, she lifted her head and looked at him quietly before speaking in a soft voice. "No need. I'm not coming back." Julian froze. Willow stepped past him, carrying a small box as she walked toward the door. After 4 years, she realized there wasn't much she could take from Nebula. At the door, she tilted her head slightly. Her voice was laced with quiet restraint as she said, "Bye, Julian." A strange pang hit Julian's chest. Something about Willow felt different. But he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Standing in her empty office, he watched as she walked toward the elevator and slowly disappeared from sight. At that moment, Julian didn't yet realize that Willow had just said her final goodbye. She was leaving Nebula and leaving him. And she wasn't coming back. Willow bumped into Jeffrey in the parking lot. Jeffrey seemed surprised to see her. He thought for a short while before walking over toward her. His eyes were deep as he asked, "Are you really leaving Nebula?" Willow hummed softly. "Yes. I'm leaving." She threw the box into the boot of her car and closed it. Then, she turned around and said faintly, "Thanks for your help the other night." Jeffrey looked closely at Willow's face. There was a faraway look in her eyes that concealed everything and revealed nothing. This was the Willow that he knew. Her fragile beauty that night had been nothing but a dream. His eyes dimmed considerably. Then, he nodded with reservation. "It was nothing," he responded coldly. Nonetheless, Jeffrey continued standing there as he watched Willow's car disappear out of the parking lot. Seemingly in deep thought, Willow finally arrived back at Grandview Manor around 8 p.m. later that evening. As soon as she got out of the car, she caught a whiff of osmanthus flowers in the breeze that welcomed her. It was quite a refreshing scent. Blair came out to greet her and asked, "Mrs. Ziegler, will you be having dinner alone today? Or would you like to wait for Mr. Ziegler instead? The food is already all prepared. We'll just need to warm it up a little." Willow thought about it for a moment. Then, she answered faintly, "There's no need to prepare my meals anymore from today onward." Blair paled in shock. She wanted to ask why, but Willow had already walked through the manor and was heading straight upstairs. A tea was brightly lit on the second floor. Willow slowed down as she fixed her gaze on the beautifully decorated corridor. She then took slow, heavy steps forward. Every step she took reminded her of Julian, their past, their experiences, their hardships, and the pain that he caused her. Julian, if you want power, then let me assist you. Julian, these hard times will soon pass, right? Julian. My stomach hurts. It hurts so bad, we're sorry, Mrs. Ziegler, but after a close-up examination, we've found out that the chances of you getting pregnant are close to zero. Perhaps you'd like to consider adoption instead? It was just about 30 feet from one end to the other, but it felt as though Willow had relived her life all over again. The end of the corridor also felt like the end of her feelings for Julian. The night breeze blew gently around her, making her face feel icy to the touch. She pushed open the door to the bedroom and flipped on the light switches, basking the whole room in a warm glow. For the past 4 years, her life had revolved primarily around Julian. She had been with him as he seized power to stand at the top. Although Julian gained everything, Willow realized that she lost more and more of herself as time passed. Luckily, she was finally going to be free from it all. Willow walked into the walk-in wardrobe and brought out a few large suitcases before she began to pack. She packed the regular clothes she wore often, along with the pricey jewelry that she owned. She wasn't going to leave them behind for Julian. After she was done packing, Willow got up and happened to glance up at the oil painting that was hanging on the wall. She had painted it. It was a painting of Julian in his younger days. He looked young and full of life, but there wasn't any love left between them anymore, which meant there was no need for this painting to exist anymore. Willow found a tube of lipstick in her purse and began to scribble on the canvas with it. Bright streaks of red were dragged all over the painting, turning it gory and frightening to look at. In a matter of seconds, the painting was completely disfigured. Julian's face had disappeared under the red streaks of lipstick. However much love Willow had poured into the painting when she made it back then, she now replaced them all with an equal amount of hatred. The oil painting wasn't the only thing that suffered her wrath. Even their wedding photos were also slashed to ribbons with a knife. This was the end of their relationship. Just like their brightly smiling portraits that could never be pieced together again, the knife dropped from Willow's fingers. Her arm just wouldn't stop shaking. She then fell to the ground and covered her eyes with her hands as tears pooled in them. She had wasted all of her youth. Everything tasted bitter, just like that night when she'd felt the excruciating pain in her belly. Willow didn't even look back when she finally left. The master bedroom felt empty without its mistress. The only thing left as a memento of her existence was the diamond ring on the bedside table, sparkling coldly in the darkness. Blair couldn't stop Willow. The only thing she could do was watch helplessly as Willow left in her car and sped off into the night. When Blair finally snapped out of it, she immediately called up Julian. Julian was in the VIP ward at Everglow Hospital. He stood at the end of the corridor, close to the floor-to-ceiling windows, a tall and lonely figure as the night breeze fanned around his face, was on the phone with Blair, calling from the manor. She sounded anxious. "Sir, Mrs. Ziegler has just left." A look of impatience appeared in Julian's eyes. Where did she say she was going? He didn't think much about it. He just thought that Willow was perhaps in a shitty mood and had gone out to take a breather. Hadn't she just gone out drinking a few nights before? Julian then chided Blair for blowing things out of proportion. Blair went silent for a while before finally speaking up. She refused to say. She also brought with her half a dozen suitcases. "We went upstairs to check and saw that she'd taken her clothes and jewelry. The bedroom's also been left in a mess. Mr. Ziegler, I think that you should hurry home as soon as possible to take a look." Julian felt his chest tighten. He gripped his phone a little harder as his mind began to wander. It wasn't until a long while later that he finally hung up and hurried to the elevators. The lights shone on him as he walked past, casting a stern yet perfect shadow onto the ground. However, if one looked closely, one would see that the eyelashes were shaking. By the time Julian rushed back to Grandview Manor, it was already late at night. He hurried upstairs to the second floor and pushed open the door that led to the master bedroom that he shared with Willow, only just opened it by a crack when he caught sight of the mess inside. The wedding photos that used to hang on the wall above the bed now lay crumpled on the ground, its glass and frame smashed into a million pieces on the floor. The photo of them smiling happily at each other had also been slashed into shreds, walked farther into the walk-in wardrobe. The half that belonged to Willow looked as though it had just been cleaned out by a robber. The doors were wide open, with not a single clothing item in sight. Her clothes and jewelry were all gone, even Willow's most beloved oil painting, the one she'd painted after begging him for the longest time after their wedding to be her model and muse. The one proof of the rare sweet moments they ever shared in their marriage was utterly ruined. Julian couldn't understand. Why did Willow keep distancing herself from him and arguing with him only after they'd finally made it to the top and had everything that they'd ever wanted? Did she know just how many people were vying for her position as his wife? Did she really not want any of that anymore? He refused to believe it. Julian stood amongst the shards of glass and called Willow's number. He thought that she was just pretending to run away from home so that he would acknowledge her presence. Unexpectedly, Willow picked up almost immediately. He started interrogating her about the mess at home. He told her that if the media caught wind of the fuss she'd kicked up today, the public would start gossiping about them, and that would cause Nebula's share prices to drop, then ordered her to come home at once. "There's a limit to everything you do, including kicking up fusses like this, Willow Harper. Think about the whole picture for once." The night was dark and silent, and Willow's calm voice could be heard from the other end of the line. "There won't be any sort of picture anymore, Julian Ziegler. I've already gotten someone to help me file for divorce. You'll be getting a court summons very soon." Julian's Adam's apple bobbed. He took a long time to respond. "What do you mean?" After a few seconds, Willow's cold voice was heard again. "Exactly what you think I mean. We are done, Julian Ziegler." Then, she hung up on him. Julian tried calling her back, but his calls wouldn't go through anymore. Instead, a robotic voice answered. "I'm sorry, the person you have called is not available." Julian stood rooted in his place for a very long time. At the door, Blair cautiously approached him and said, "Ms. Burke called. She said she'd like to speak with you." Julian could feel the veins in his head throbbing. He suddenly yelled back at her, "Tell her to fuck off." Willow was gone. Willow didn't want him anymore. His Willow didn't want him anymore. She once promised him that she would be with him forever. She told him before that she would forever be by his side. She told him that she would never leave him. Julian suppressed his anger as best as he could, breathing lowly and shallowly. Just then, he happened to catch sight of a yellowed piece of paper under the bed. It looked like it was from many years ago. He frowned and wondered what it could be. When he picked it up from the ground, he was instantaneously stunned when he finally had a proper look at it. It was a test report from the obstetrics and gynecology hospital, and Willow's name was on it.